C. Wade Bentley lives, teaches, writes, and plays with his grandsons in Salt Lake City. He has 4 children and 4 grandsons and a granddaughter on the way. He is also an avid hiker, and he frequently hikes with his father, who is now 80 years old. His poems have been published or are forthcoming in Cimarron Review, Western Humanities Review, Rattle, Subtropics, Chicago Quarterly Review, Best New Poets, Ardor, and New Ohio Review, among others. A chapbook of his poems, Askew, was recently published by Red Ochre Press, and I am very happy to announce that a book of his poems will be published in March by Aldrich Press, titled What Is Mine? Wade attended BYU from 1979 to 1985, where he earned both his BA and MA in English. He has taught in schools in Utah and Michigan, and currently he teaches composition and creative writing at Salt Lake Community College, where he also works for the concurrent enrollment department, visiting high school English classes around Salt Lake Valley. I first became acquainted with Wade when I had the good fortune of being his student as a sophomore in high school. Thankfully, Wade is the only person in the room who knew me as a sophomore in high school. I was a grim specimen. But what I remember about Wade and about his special craft as a teacher was his quiet but persistent fidelity to language and to the hope that language and poetic figuration could help his students navigate the muddy waters of adolescence. He encouraged self-awareness through writing in each of his students, and I have not forgotten the attentive and generous way he responded to my own paltry efforts at self-expression. But I don't just mean that Wade was generous in the way of praise. He was generous in awareness of individuality, generous in empathy, and generous in creative energy that helped establish trust in his students that meaning could be formed out of the clutter of their lives if they could and would sacrifice and learn to shape and mold meaning through metaphor and language. Wade's own poetry is a testament to many years of such sacrifice. His poems often confront the waste places of the human psyche where loss, shame, failed ambition, dead relationships, and broken faith threaten to devour any hope of signification, communion, or purpose. And his verse sometimes disturbs because it unflinchingly examines suffering, doubt, and damaged faith. But it is in the act of disturbance that Wade's insight and honesty consoles and elevates his reader. His best poetic offerings provide solace in authenticity of emotion and in the promise that out of our human predicament, beauty may still be formed. Please welcome Wade.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Tamara. What a pleasure to be the object of an introduction like that. Obviously, she's a fine creative writer herself, so thank you very much. And thanks to Stephen Tuttle and Joey Franklin and others who acquiesced to let me come here today, and Mel Henderson, who is not a man, as I've discovered today, but has been a wonderful help to me in getting ready for this. So thank you, everyone. And I came down a little bit early today so I could acclimate, coming from the heathen Northlands. Had to rediscover what it was like to be at BYU. It's been quite a few years. I started here about 35 years ago, and so had a good time rediscovering, revisiting some of my old haunts, the bookstore, the candy counter in the bookstore, the 5th floor of the library, where I expected my thesis to be checked out, but it was sitting there on the shelf still. And then, of course, had to wander through the old Jesse Knight building, which has been nicely refurbished, but still held some of the old charm of the Jesse Knight building. Spent a lot of hours there taking writing classes from Leslie Norris, Doug Thayer, Clinton Larson, others. And I remember feeling very pathetic at times as a student and as a would-be poet. I used to give my poems to Steve Walker whenever possible. And if any of you know Steve Walker, you know that he is pathologically kind and encouraging. And he was with me as well. I could always count on him to find something nice to say. And the things I gave him were really awful, insipid poems. And gradually, with the help of people here, I started to improve. And I remember several years after I started talking with Steve about poetry or whatever, and he mentioned that I was one of the two best students that he knew who were also writers, the two best student writers. And I wondered who the other one was, and he mentioned somebody, Lance Larson. Didn't know who that was, but several times he made that comment, which I thought was very kind. And sadly, I don't think Lance has amounted to much, but Steve was half right, because here I am today, and it's an honor to be here. So, all right, on to the poems, for which I will need glasses. First one is called My Number. Can everyone hear me okay? I have forgotten my PIN number, forgotten which anecdotes I have told to whom, and come to think of it, most of my best stories. I have no longer read any of the books that lean against each other now with their dog ears and grease stains. I may have taken my various once daily doses several times, or not at all. The bathtub has long since drained, and still I sit here blinking, naked as the day I was born. I remember the way to the trailhead of the mountain I always said I would climb when it came to this. I told myself I would sit on the peak and face into the sun until it was gone. In the last light, my mind would hold as tightly as it could to Peter Boy and Jamesy and the rest, urging them to live wildly happy lives and not wait as long as I have to stop being afraid. Things I may have told them once or 100 times before. It's always good to start with a poem about death and dementia. Kind of warms up the room, I think. So let's get a little cheerier. This one is called Nature Gets Uppity. The first story in the poem was actually from a news story. In Clovis, New Mexico, it came in the form of a tumbleweed invasion, stacked so high that Jorge Garcia had to carve a path so his grandmother could get out of her door. In Santa Rosa, California, a pot of azaleas conspired to poison Hannah Perlman's cat after Boots removed their hot pink heads and batted them around the hardwood floor before swallowing each one. Several squadrons of oak and maple leaves that homeowners in Altoona, Pennsylvania say seem to come out of nowhere during a recent windstorm, as if malevolently bent on infiltrating their wide lawns and walkways, were beaten back by a coordinated phalanx of Briggs and Stratton leaf blowers. "We won this time," said Block Captain Hank Musselman. Meanwhile, far out to sea, polyps of coral form insidious invertebrate colonies, flank upon flank, biding their time, providing cover for ninja stars, seahorses, menacing anemones. Thanks. This one also on the light side, I guess, kind of gallows humor. Perhaps you'll notice a little nod to Billy Collins, a poet I admire. It's called Boondoggle. So the cholesterol numbers came back, and despite periodic and lackadaisical diet and exercise, the numbers that should have been down were up, and those we would like to see going up, says Dr. Paisley, are not. It's easy to find metaphors in plaque, in arteriosclerosis, the way the fatty residue of each year is deposited along arterial walls like growth rings in a Douglas fir. How hemoglobin, lifeblood, shall we say, now strains through narrowed channels like pudding through a straw. At some point, a charming but indefatigable beaver, let's call him Claudie, will finish his dam across the arms of the oxbow, forming Lake Infarction, where no one will ever put in a birch bark canoe or land a largemouth bass or send their kids to camp in the summer to learn about knot tying or necking or making brightly colored lanyards out of boondoggle. For some reason, over the years, I've written quite a few bug poems. I'm not sure why that happened, but let's call it my insect suite. That sounds fancier. So here are two poems from the insect suite. Cicadian. Infinite nymphs sucking sweet xylem sap, grubbed in mud, waiting these 17 years for the siren song to draw them upwards at last into mad, full-throated orgy, the brief bacchanal before only molted husks remain, lining every tree like abandoned burkas, like withered penitents awaiting the rapture, and then silence, the sharp and harrowing nothing left when life has gone to ground. Fireflies. On some summer night she caught us one by one, peeked through her gentle fist to watch our flutter and pulse, then penned us in glass jars, each by each, lid secured with a brass ring. Henceforth, when she entered the room, she could count on us to illuminate as one, beat our wings against the glass, glow the more brightly should she reach out or say a word before leaving us to turn again enough pale gyres to fill a jar. Lines. When there seemed no other choice, we pulled off I-70 and along the frontage road until it dead-ended next to a field of winter wheat, cut to stubble and straddled by transmission towers 200 feet high, striding through the land like something sci-fi searching for humans to enslave. But it was just the two of us, not even putting up a fight, standing beside the old Volvo and listening to the wind blow through the power lines, the crackle of the humid afternoon air ionizing, charging, and beneath it all the steady coronal hiss like the rasp of grasshoppers in the cheat grass along the road. The car ticked slowly as it cooled, and when dusk dropped down from the hills, at last you asked if I could feel the ground shiver through the soles of my shoes, feel the ambient electricity along my scalp, or the slightest arrhythmia in my heart. Because if not, you said, leaving the thought unfinished, letting it be carried away with the high wires instead, all the long miles up and over the Rockies and into a million homes where other people who are not us stand in kitchen light and porch light, waiting for what comes next, for the end of the line. Gardener. Mother was up to her elbows in the blood of stewed tomatoes, peeling the tough skin and crushing the softer flesh between her fingers. That was the year her garden would not stop producing. But there was never too much of anything in our house unless it was children, and there was no talk of that. All of us were baptized young and taught to take the sacrament. Here is the blood, here is the body. And we sat in a row on the church pew like gleaming baby lettuce plants in need of a good thinning. When later my own child lay with his skull peeled open, brain wet and pink between a surgeon's fingers, I called on God as if 30 years of sermons made me ripe for a miracle, then cursed the half-dozen tries it took him to get it right. All these years later, my son flush in the growing season of his own life, I am surprised by the residue of anger I feel for that ham-fisted God, the same gardener my mother still speaks of, how he will turn her under soon, how she has gone mostly to seed after all, only useless tassels rattling in a cold breeze, turn her into the soil until everything and nothing will have gone to waste. How are we doing? Okay? All right. This poem I was pleased to see is on the poster outside on the way in. It's been a good poem for me. Storytelling. The morning they saw the body in the river on the way to school was also the day Jessica said how she'd known all along that Seth was gay, and she was perfectly fine with it. And Kaylee said, well, me too, but if you knew, why didn't you say something before we went out for 2 months? But just before Jessica could answer was when Jared said, what the hell? And pointed down along the banks of the river, where half hidden in the grass was what they would soon know was the naked body of a young woman, maybe a few years older than they were, and where for a still and silent minute they just looked at the way her hair had woven itself into the weeds, the way her head would nudge gently against the shore and then retreat, how the little ripples in this quiet section of water would splash onto her right hip, all purple and gray, shiny and taut, with a look on her face and her wide eyes that said nothing at all, that said, I have no opinion. I will have nothing to say on that matter, and it's no use waiting for it. You will tell the police your story now and play it up big for your mates at school later, but you won't hear it from me. That story, that love story, that fantasy I had hoped to tell, had begun to tell, has now moved to midstream and will be out to sea sooner or later, where old couples who are even now walking along the shore will pause from time to time, their faces into the wind, listening. My name. Okay, so they forgot my name and my coffee order, and then forgot to make my coffee at all. And then when they did, it was with a sorry Blaine, and Blaine is nothing like my name. So I'm holding my coffee with one hand while standing on the bus, the other holding on to the overhead strap. Standing because I had let the Russian woman with 3 kids have the seat. And now one of them is poking me in the right thigh with a Spider-Man action figure and providing sound effects like die, Dr. Octopus. Also, obviously not my name. I walk the last block to work past a building being brought down by wrecking balls and giant articulated steel-armed machines. A building I have walked past for years, and before that, a building where my grandmother took me for breakfast every Saturday with pancakes and bacon and so much syrup over everything that when I was done, she took a napkin and licked it and cleaned the corners of my mouth and said, like clockwork every time, "Sonny boy, not my name. I'll find you under there." Finding a way. Life may lie sandwiched between layers of ice on Europa or Ganymede. Mars once, maybe. Goldilocks seems to have accommodations universe-wide. Earthside, it's inside cardboard boxes alongside riverbanks and DNA preserved in mammoth marrow. Yesterday I saw an old man leashed to a cytoxin drip laugh after finding insect life in his ear. White anemones somehow suspend themselves beneath Antarctic ice. Bridges. We drive the wide, humid tongue of Mississippi floodplain, fireflies lifting from the fields like tracers. You remind me when we reach the bridge how much you hate bridges, how see-through and ramshackle they seem, the water always waiting darkly below for the misstep that will send us over. I see your jaw tighten, your hands grip your knees until we reach the other side at last, you relaxing into a song about a woman done wrong, putting your feet on the dash and asking when we can stop for moonshine or sweet tea. But it is midnight and the South has gone to bed, leaving just the two of us in all the world now, windows down to catch the first hint of cool, a glimpse of gray houses in the trees. You reach your hand across, leaving it there in mine, until we see the distant lights of Tupelo shimmering like will-o'-the-wisps leading us on. I think I have a couple of grandsons here today, so you'll hear me mention their names occasionally. Run, boys. It is too fine a morning to quibble about the caramelized air crossing the road from the crematorium and into the soccer pitch where my grandson and his mates in their bright blues and reds make tracks in the last of a spring frost, their shin guards and bright knees flashing up and down the field of battle, high-pitched voices calling for the ball as it caroms from one shaggy head to the next, ball and boys in perpetual motion, finding a second wind with the sun as if they could run all day, my own voice cheering them on, after it now, William, don't stop, boys, until halftime when it's all breath and sweat, and above the trees a line of pigeons on a wire that could almost pass for more noble creatures, Andean condors, perhaps, black coats shimmering in a pre-Columbian sun. Braided. You have let down her white hair for a good brushing before bed, her head inclining toward you, then away. On the vanity, the spectrum of her jeweled pills like magic beans or bracelet charms. She closes her eyes as you rebraid, remembering the time she cut it all, blonde then, in the page boy style, so short she could see the shock register in your eyes before you righted yourself, kissed the bare novelty of her neck. Askew. There's something not quite right today. Askew, not on kilter. It's as if you, all of you, are pod people now, and no one seems able to tell but me. As if one insignificant satellite fell, so everyone's GPS calmly sends them just 1.3 degrees off, north-northwest. Have you jointly agreed not to notice the vertigo of this day? how even the mad concerto of evening traffic is maybe half of 1/2 step flat. Because what I see in your quaff of coffee, your bus stop stare, the insouciance of your Bluetooth laugh, is an ignorance born, I can only surmise, of a Stepford wives-like blind eye, when clearly nothing jives, nothing about this day is copacetic, nothing passes the smell test. Can no one bring back yesterday, that golden day when a person could be counted on to tell you where you stood before she, or someone very like, would move the fulcrum, nudge the lucid universe one bubble off plumb? Turned. At some point during the night, the milk turned, though no one will be the wiser until breakfast. That bottle of wine, once worth more than your car, might now offend some of your fine-palated guests who would detect the faintest bouquet of wet dog from a cork gone bad. And it's not just beverages, as it turns out. The homegrown terrorist sleeper cells in your bloodstream, for instance, for so long living quietly in quaint suburban bone marrow bungalows, have now activated in order to surreptitiously poison you while you take the kids to soccer practice and think you might fancy your neighbor's wife. Some weeks later, another heated discussion will take place inside the house while your son and daughter play in the yard. See how one is on the swing set, reaching her toes to the sky, while the other races around the yard with a T-Rex soaring in his hand, yet to discover how absurd it was to think they were meant to fly. Envy. The stone wall gives up before it gets to the stile, petering out into a moraine of rounded river rocks spreading to either side. A gate holds to a leaning post by one rusted iron finger. It seems to matter little, though, with nothing to say what was once held in or out. In a shallow depression near one gray stone, a killdeer mother frets and whistles like a wind-up tin bird before settling on her speckled clutch of 4, her neck and head still bobbing, spy-hopping aspirationally from stone to stone. Thomas. And what did you hope to find when you thrust your hand into the side of born-again Jesus? Would the kidneys be diamonds now, large and smooth as river stones, the sweetbreads all gone to rubies, warm and red? You had it made, right? The guy who held in his hand the amaranthine entrails of our resurrected Lord. Who would believe that even as your fingertips next felt the nail holes in his hand, a megajoule jolt running through you like lightning, part of you wanted to hold up to the light the emerald of his spleen for one quick appraisal of color, cut, and clarity? Story problem. When first you ciphered me, sussed me, summed me, I was a train leaving Chicago, a boy with 5 apples, a sliced pie, the wide world some undetermined distance ahead, never deducing you were even then leaving St. Louis at 3:30, warm tart on the table before you, 2 pieces equals 2/6, which is, by another word, a third. Heat. There is a telescope through which one may watch an entire galaxy slowly lose itself in a black hole. Stars, solar systems, kit, caboodle. Of course, the energy is not lost at all, according to thermodynamic law, and will rush off to power stellar nurseries, quasars, internet clouds elsewhere in the universe. Still, it is something to see the tight spirals unwind, like the natural pin curls of your hair, as we head west across the Mississippi, Nebraska, into the dry desert air of western Colorado, and then Arizona, where, as we walk out on the Wallapai Skywalk at the far end of the Grand Canyon, slowly making the horseshoe turn and seeing the Colorado River far below, it is the straightness of your hair that strikes me. And this is where, when the ranger has moved the crowd along, we hang back, having chosen this spot, surfed here online last New Year's Eve, agreed that this is where we would toss our notes to each other out into the void. Our crumpled complaints about your failings and mine sucked into the gorge now, just as the red walls begin to go dark in the evening light. Leaving them behind, we can only wait to see if the repurposed energy of 27 years will find us again, and whether, if any such laws apply, it will be enough to save us. So, a little speculative poem here. Is kind of, what if Jesus had the chance to rethink some of his decisions? Maybe some advice someone might give him. This is called Do-Over. Laugh like the demons gone huffing into the sea. Taste the final fig before it withers, the second wine at Cana. And when Lazarus comes out at last, by God, you boys pick up Mary M. and take it on the lam. Sorry, maybe you were working out whether that was sacrilegious or not. I'm not sure either. This is called Dead to the World. When the news comes the way it sometimes does, in a dream in which you are eating your fingers, smacking your lips at their deep-fried goodness, but all the while knowing there is something not quite right about this scenario. But the wrongness is not enough yet to overcome your feeding frenzy until you get all the way to the third finger on your second hand and begin to notice a persistent tapping in the background, as though a tiny metronome were keeping the beat for a tiny mouse ballerina who lives and practices her pas de chat in the suburbs of Medulla Oblongata. But until then, you are dead to the world. Not unlike yesterday, when your co-workers emerged from their cubicles en masse to huddle around the big screen in the break room. From your chair, you could see some of them lift a hand to cover their mouths. Others shake their heads and slump into chairs. And when you joined them for a closer look, no one spoke to you except in half-muffled sobs, their red eyes looking right through you. So this, you guessed, this had nothing to do with another birthday party where there would be cake and singing to while away the rest of the workday. No, this must be something new they were finding out about the world, at their ages too. Something flashing in their eyes, worming into their ears, something that would briefly drown out the sound of the dozen clocks in the empty office, a ticking which seems to you the only sound. Garage sale. a Weber grill and assorted tongs, twined bundles of dog fancy magazines, burl bowls holding hand-tied flies. Sing along with Frank and Tony 45s in a package deal with the RCA Victor stereo console. Some are picking through a Tupperware bin of porcelain border collies, while others hold colored glass lamps up to the light or rattle the red metal drawers of the rolling snap-on tool chest. There is little interest in the boxed and neatly folded Van Heusen polycotton dress shirts or still gleaming Barbasol travel shaving kit. Two teen boys pull from a colorful nest of suspenders and snap them hard against their chests to see who will flinch. Next to the window, holding a thin handkerchief to her nose against the dust falling through the light, Mother rests in a plaid lawn chair, poised to tell the price of things. Shoes. When some burble of apnea slowly wakes me, I am still tethered to a dream in which I am telling my mother how comfortable she will be on the ice floe I have chosen for her. The nice pillow I have placed in the center, the wraps of ermine, marten, and lynx. But she is having none of it. Even as I push her gently from the shore and the tide takes her out into open water, she keeps her eyes so fixed on me that now, as I wake and rouse, my mother many years dead, I feel them still. It's 4 a.m., 4:13. My eyes begin to find shapes in the darkness, the closet doors, the bookshelves, the gray glint of silver-plated picture frames. I navigate easily to the bathroom with the sonar of old age and repetition. Corner of bed, edge of dresser, shoes beside chair, laid out for morning. And maybe the shoes are to blame for a sleepless hour of wandering through rooms, noting the bag of bread left open on the kitchen counter, the buttons on the TV remote still glowing green, my car keys in their bowl by the front door, jacket hanging on its hook. Not for the first time, panic rises from the wooden floorboards as I see how completely the night is poised for the day. How soon I will be expected to slip into the shoes, the jacket, take those keys primed with potential energy, and navigate through a day in which landmarks and parallels have shifted, and where, unmoored, I will jostle and stutter and bark my shins against the sharp edge of the world. This one's untitled. 10-year-old green bones on a 3-speed bumblebee yellow and black bike, bright morning and prospects all downhill and hands-free, past Don Lynn's house, who is only half watching between her round-off double backs. Yeah, that's it. All right, couple more. This one's called Yeti. At first light, he is sitting on my chest. As always, he smells of carrion with subtle notes of charnel. Today, though, something new. Is that almonds? Cyanide, he says, his voice like a Florida sinkhole. Trying to keep it fresh. Delightful, I say, as he gets down to the serious work of scooping out my honeycombed brain pan with a spoon carved long ago from the leg bone of a beagle inlaid with the milk teeth of orphans. Exquisite. This one I mostly just like the title, so that's why I'm reading it. It's called Edifice Rex. I imagine the building coming along nicely, with new rooms springing up around every corner. I am the foreman, and it feels good to be in charge. I point things out to others on the curling pages of blueprint, giving instructions about mitered corners and staircase risers. My subcontractors seem familiar, relatives, friends, and are at first blush eager to help, setting to work with a will. But I hear their whispers when I leave the room, and know they have put aside their tool belts and coping saws to have a go at me. Soon, even as I carefully match up intricate wallpaper designs, which, now that I notice, look like stylized genitals with paisley chancres, the wallboard begins to crumble, sustainably harvested hardwood floors peel back, and from the insubordinate chandelier in the foyer, faux crystalline laughter. Okay, two more, I think. So this one is the title poem for my new book. So go ahead and put that in your planners now that you'll rush out and get that in March when it comes out. It's called What Is Mine? At certain registers of song, I can no longer hear the birds. Without glasses, I can't tell monkshood from fireweed. There are alpine lakes to which my legs refuse to return me. I rely on photographs to bring back the view from the north rim of Crater Lake, or remind me I once lived a year in Montana. So when I work to put down words for the bull elk brunching in a meadow where the grass is so deep only his rack is visible, turning side to side as he grazes like bare scrub oak branches in a wind, this is no whim, but a pushing back against the bleaching of time, insisting that the red wounds scribed deeply into the brown velvet of his antlers are somehow also mine. And just this last little one is called Say. Say that you believe. Say that each day rolls out new, that the cobblestone streets are washed clean, that shoes lie mended and waiting by the hearth, and that on the sun-porch desk, white sheaves of paper shiver beside the black Remington Rand. Thank you very much. I'm to see if there are any questions. So if you have any questions that are generally easy and friendly, I'd appreciate it. How did the poem Envy come about? It came about after actually seeing a killdeer on a walk and noticing the sound she made, how frantic she was, and she always seemed to be looking for something better than what she had. She wanted to be somewhere she wasn't, and so that was what triggered it. Other questions? Yes.
In the yard sale poem, I admired the way that you gave us just that image of the mother sitting in the chair that was very suggestive of meaning without hitting it too hard on the nose. I wonder if you could talk about taking an image, say, of objects and people in a garage sale and moving towards meaningfulness.
Yeah, so he asked about the poem Garage Sale, especially the end image of the mother sitting there, and how do you keep from hitting meaning too directly on the nose. That ending was actually a surprise to me, as often happens when I'm working on a poem. I knew that I wanted to write about a garage sale. I had been to some recently, and just all of the clutter that is there and the vividness of the kinds of things that people are giving away, their lifetime of collections, was something I wanted to write about. But that last line of the mother putting the price on things, that was one of those lovely surprises that sometimes happens when you're writing. So, other questions? Yeah.
So that's two questions. Do you start writing poetry when you're hiking or when you're having an experience that you then write about? Do you start thinking of the words and the lines at that time? And also, sort of related, do you have a set time every day or every week that you write?
Thank you for those questions. My daughter, asked if I start writing poems in my head while I'm hiking, or if I'm thinking of lines and that sort of thing. And then I think the second question is, do I have a set time for writing? I don't write while I'm up in the mountains, which seems a little bit strange. I think maybe it's because all I would write about would be mountains if I were writing up there. But when I'm in the poetic zone, when I feel like I need to write a poem or I want to write a poem, pretty much anything becomes fodder for a poem. And I do pick up lines or bits of dialogue or a story from the newspaper that sticks in my head until I have time to sit down and work with it. I like to write poetry. I know that some poets talk about it being a struggle, and you know, you have that view of the emaciated poet starving for his art, and clearly I'm not. But I enjoy it. I usually write in a bit of a rush the first draft, and then the part that I like the best is the revision, which takes considerably longer. But that's where nice things like the mother sitting in the lawn chair come out unexpectedly, and I try to develop meaning that I hadn't been aware of before. And then if I think the poem has some potential, I'll fiddle with it indefinitely until I send it off, or I'm tired of fiddling. So, but I usually write at least a couple of hours a week, just focused on writing, and then all of the pre-writing stuff that goes on. Other questions? Yes. How has my experience as an educator influenced my poetry? Well, certainly, I think it helps that my students see me as a writer as well. So as I'm trying to teach them how to write, it's not just academic book learning, it's something I'm daily trying to do as well. And so if I can share my experiences with writing and the struggle of writing and empathize with them about how difficult that can be, I think that's a helpful thing. Other questions? Yes. Thank you.
And what types of elements have you seen are in your poetry now after years of experience or whatever else has shaped your poetry? What type of elements are there now that weren't?
Well, you know, I think the fault was mostly how young I was. I didn't have experiences. I tried to write about things I shouldn't have been trying to write about, and you don't know their cliches when you're young, and so you think you're being wonderfully fresh and original, and you find out later that every poet for 1,000 years has considered those sorts of things or used those images. So I think youth was just part of it, and inexperience. But having good teachers, I mean, when I took a couple of classes from Leslie Norris, that was when I got my first image of what it means to be a poet, and recognized I want to be something like that if I can be. He was a man that could read the phone book, and you would listen for hours. You guys don't know what a phone book is, but it was a book full of phone numbers. But he just lived the life of a poet, and you could see that in the way he taught and the way he talked about writing. I mean, I hate to say it, but I think practice is how I've gotten better. I decided to get serious about writing poetry, probably about 10 years ago. I'd, played with it all along, but finally decided, look, you're getting old. If you're going to do something with this, you'd better give it a shot. And so that's when I started to consistently write and send things off and deal with rejections and trying to improve and learn from those things. So does that answer your question? Went way off somewhere, I think, but okay. Anything else? I think we're, yes.
How do you, I'm not a writer, so I'm not really familiar, but how do you balance between kind of getting ideas, how to do things from other people and reading, and then just kind of trailblazing your own?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. He asked, how do you balance learning from other writers and developing your own style so that you're not copying someone else? Is that kind of what you're saying? First of all, I think for people who want to write poetry, reading poetry is just essential. I think you have to see what other poets are doing and get used to the sound of it and the rhythms and all of that. I think that's just, you can't do it without that. And I think when I was younger, I certainly did copy the style of poets that I admired. I think sometimes I still see the tone of, like a Philip Larkin or a Richard Wilbur that will show up in my poetry, and I'll recognize that and be surprised by it. And certainly when I read Billy Collins, I want to write Billy Collins poems because he makes it seem so effortless. And of course you try that and it's not at all effortless. But I think you learn as far as tuning your ear and understanding what a good line sounds like and how sounds work together. And then gradually, as you write a lot on your own, your voice starts to emerge and you notice that it's not exactly the same as anyone else's. So, anything else? Okay. Thank you very much again.